companies that I'd say that I would advise against working for in every division of every industry in the world. But cannabis being in its infancy state, you know, it is really something that we're at a very, you know, different time in this entire process because it's so very, very new. They had a slideshow for me, I believe. Yeah, awesome. They're gonna put some slides up. This is me. This slide is not that necessary, but I will give you some hard facts and some tips and some truths. Currently in my career, I'm the Director of Operations at LB Atlantis. We are hiring. We have a little table set up over there. If you have a resume, please make sure that you leave one for us. We're hiring in our packaging, delivery, distribution. So if you have, you know, any skills along those lines that you think would be valuable, but also, you know, there's a lot of opportunity that might not seem completely applicable when you get started, but that are. I also am the co-producer of a show called the State of Cannabis News Hour. We have a Monday through Friday news show that's on Clubhouse. It's at 9 a.m., 9 to 10 a.m. every morning. We do 1 hour of all the latest news and information going on in cannabis at the time. So if you want to stay abreast of all of the information that's going on, it's free. It's on Clubhouse. We are a nonprofit, so I always am telling people to donate. But besides that, it is free to listen to. And then also myself, Nicole West. I'm a business advisor kind of independently, and you can find my contact at NicoleWest.com. Next slide. So a little about me and my career. I've assisted in opening about 45 plus retail locations in 8 states. I've hired over 500 people in over the past 12 years, which I think is pretty impressive in my mind, of being able to know that I can help people in that way. You know, to be able to say that I've given 500 opportunities is probably one of the coolest things that I can say about the career that I have now, honestly. And I tell people that that is something that you could look forward to in cannabis. Getting in is to, you know, hold the door open for the next person behind you. And every single time we make it to that next step, there's, you know, you should leave the door open for the person coming up next and help them and, you know, help people get to that next point. I've overseen over 420 employees at one time. It was actually 450, but I like to say 420 because anytime I could put that number in my presentations, I do. I've helped scale companies from 15 million to 90 million in a little under 3 years. I've helped scale 400,000 square feet of cultivation, assisted in operations in most forms, extraction, assisted in licensing for 50 states. I've written SOPs for retail, cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution. I worked for Weed Maps. The beginning. I worked for Weed Maps when people didn't realize what a behemoth of a company Weed Maps was going to become. A lot of love for Weed Maps though, and we launched marijuana.com. It was one of the largest website acquisitions at the time in cannabis. They bought a website for $4.5 million for the domain, which is pretty amazing. I've written SOPs for the High Times Cannabis Cup, the first compliant cannabis cup here in California. I assisted in writing and running the first compliant cup, which I'm really proud of. And I've written a bunch of SOPs in general. I recently sold my manuals that I have been writing to the union. The UFCW actually acquired my my educational materials. It's really exciting to know that they did that because it means that they're really taking education seriously in the way of what's going on with cannabis right now. So with the thought of, hey, you know, is this a real industry? Well, currently there's 10,000 people in the United States that are unionized under the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, which is the 5th largest union in the United States by volume, which is also the grocers union that's covering cannabis. And so, you know, there's opportunity to be, and it's crazy when I tell my family that I worked with and I worked in the union in cannabis, everyone just kind of stares at me like I'm crazy, but it's really happening. And I've reviewed over 150 business plans in raising capital, and I've approved deployment of a little over $100 million in capital deployment as well. It's been a long, crazy road. I've been doing this since 2008. My first hiring and process was in 2009. I originally started in cannabis through real estate. The economy crashed, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I started doing commercial leases for cannabis, and it's just kind of snowballed through life. And I found my way here to realize that I'm in my wormhole. Like, cannabis is my wormhole. It's not just my career. It's part of who I am. And also, next slide. I'm also the first white-collar criminal in the history of regulated cannabis to receive a felony for doing her C-suite position. Yeah, that's not as fun. My list was really fun. Like, here's all the cool shit that I've done. I mean, I guess this is kind of cool if you can say, I'm making history, because making history is cool. But not on purpose. This fucking wasn't on purpose. I was vice president of a corporation. We interpreted a law that stated you can purchase 1 ounce per transaction, as if it meant that somebody could come back throughout the day. According to the district attorney and a grand jury, the spirit of the law meant that that was 1 ounce per day instead of 1 ounce per transaction. And so they held us criminally responsible for the times that people would buy some weed and come back and get some more weed. In real life, I could smoke 1 ounce of weed in a day and need to come back and get some more fucking weed. So like the idea that we can only have 1 ounce of weed in general was still kind of fucked in my mind. But regardless, I was the vice president of the company and I was in charge of everybody. And so, here we are. I'm the first white-collar criminal in the history of regulated cannabis. Well, my cohort, my partner, the assistant director of operations, Ashley Goldstein, actually was because my lawyer was late on arraignment day. Next slide, please. Okay, so some career prep. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about what you should be doing to kind of get ready for getting a career in the cannabis industry. Couple things. Work for a place that cares about compliance. The place that I worked for cared about compliance a lot. Like, they actually really cared about compliance, and we still got fucked, right? So imagine working at a place that's like, oh, nothing really matters, it's all good. My favorite thing that I hear people say is, nobody's really paying attention to that. And nobody's paying attention to that until they are. And I would really hate to be the person that learns that now they are. So, only work at a place that it makes you feel like they care. Like, not to say that everything's going to be exactly right, but that they care. Be prepared to have feelings about cannabis. Hopefully they're positive, because if I interview you and you're like, weed fucking sucks, I'd be like, okay, so maybe you shouldn't work here. But when I interview people and I'm like, oh, what do you think about weed? And they're like, well, it's, and I feel like it's like, people think it's like a fucking trick question, because for so long, if you're being interviewed in a not weed job, you're like, oh, you don't want to be like, I fucking love weed, man. I love it so much. I love everything about it. I love the way it smells. The plant's cool. And then the concentrates. And then I like to eat edibles sometimes. And you're like, man, do I do that? Do I say those things? Yes. Yes, you do, because actually it's so interesting that that's actually applicable in a lot of these situations. Now, not every job. Like, if you're trying to go get a job to be like working at like a software company, like maybe don't be like, yeah, I smoke like 17 blunts in the morning, like maybe don't like give us the quantity, but like, it's okay to be like, I really love weed and I believe it does good things and I've seen it help people. And cannabis helps me, and I use it medicinally. Like, that is an okay thing to say, and to be proud of. Like, to genuinely fucking be proud of that. And again, like I said, maybe, use moderation in the way that you're describing the quantity or the volume. Like, if I was getting interviewed, I for sure would not tell anybody. Like, I haven't been interviewed in a long time. But if I did, I for sure would not tell people the truth about how much weed that I smoke. I would tell them I do smoke a lot, but I wouldn't be like, I smoke an eighth a day, because everyone looks at me like, what the fuck? Like, you smoke how much? And especially like my boss, he smokes a little bit of weed, but like a joint, like, and a little edible, and he likes like one. And so when I finally confided in my boss as to the volume of cannabis that I smoke, he definitely looked at me like I was a little crazy. But I wouldn't look at you like that, but it's still, you want to make sure that there's a place in the middle, but my main point is have feelings about it. Have feelings. Like, I like weed. I think it's good. It has helped people. And here's things that I know about how it's helped people. Really good things to have and say in an interview. Be impeccable with your time. Man, people, plants, nobody got time to wait on you. Like, I am so serious. People get mad at me. If you're 1 minute late to an interview, I won't interview you. 1 minute. 1 minute. 1 minute. I've had somebody get so mad at me because I was like, oh, no, you're late. And she's like, it's like 1 minute. And I'm like, yeah, it's like 1 minute. And like every time that you show up to work, if it's like 1 minute, I'm going to be really annoyed with you. And I'm going to be annoyed with the fact that I hired you, remembering that you were 1 minute late at this interview. So I'm just not going to interview you because you might wow me. You might be amazing and get me to override it. And then it turns out you're a habitual late person. And I did this to myself because you were 1 minute late at this interview. So be impeccable with your time. Remember that this is still federally illegal, y'all. Like, I know everyone's got all this glitz and glamour, and it's like, oh, this is so fun, and it's beautiful, and I love this, and it is, and it is, and it is. But it's also still federally illegal. Like, I met somebody earlier who moved here because their state still will lock your ass up for a little bit of weed. Like, that's still happening in this country right now in a lot of places. And, you know, that's real life. In the way that the whole court case went down with me, they were trying to prove that we had broken a regulation within the state. Because if you break one regulation within the state's regulation, they then turn you over to the federal government, and then you're getting tried for all of this cannabis sales. 97 tons, in case anybody's curious, that they wanted to charge me with. Because that would have been outside of the regulation, according to the state, if they were able to prove that. So I took a plea deal so I didn't have to go to federal court, because that's scary as fuck. And I pled guilty to distribution of 4 to 12 ounces, which I then said in my sleep, and signed my paperwork and went and sat in jail for 30 days. But it's still federally illegal. So, like, if you're gonna do it, like, be so impeccable with everything that you're doing, and to do it right and to be able to say that you're doing it right is so important, because you could really try to do it right and still end up in jail. Sorry, not sorry. I'm not trying to scare people. Like, I ain't trying to scare people, but, like, in the right situations, in the right, you know, world, it's not that scary, right? But if you want to get to a place where you're the fucking vice president of a corporation that's got 420 people and $90 million fucking dollars, yeah, they're gonna come after somebody. Like, and real life, they arrested 15 Budtenders to slowly chop their way up to us. So the Budtenders they messed with, because the Budtenders in their minds were doing the wrong thing or the right thing or whatever it went through, and you know, at the end of the day, they didn't end up with any charges, but going to jail is fucking whack, y'all. So please work for a place that follows the rules. Be okay with having to look it up. Like, nobody has every answer. Like, every day I get asked a question that I have to go to the internet for. Don't be afraid to look it up. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, I don't understand that. Because there's new acronyms and new terms being used every single day. And I swear to you, weed is like the worst about it. You know, finance is worse. Where people just be talking in these numbers and these like things with these acronyms, like you don't know what they're talking about. It's like another fucking language. And you don't want to say anything because you're like, oh, then they're gonna know. And I feel this way all the time because I work with finance people. I come from absolutely nothing. I'm very like humble family. And I know nothing about financial literacy outside of how to fucking hustle. And so when I'm doing these finance meetings and there's these bankers and they're using all these terms, and I'm just here to be like, can they fucking make some money off this weed and be honest with the banker about it and be honest with the investor? Like, these people are fronting like that's not actually going to go down the way that you say it is. They're all breaking the law. That person is dumb, and I think they might be stealing. Peace out. That's my job. So like when I have to talk finance, I don't understand. Weed people are really bad about that too. They'll just start talking and like using these acronyms and these words like you know exactly what they're talking about. So if you're learning at a new job, don't be afraid to say, hey, what does that mean? What does that acronym mean? Because people will be using words that are not words, that are acronyms or shortened versions of words, or some of them are hodgepodge. Some of them are slang, you know, like the Zazas, are we talking about BHO or like, you know, and in case anyone's curious, the Zazas is short for exotic. It's how it's evolved for those of us who feel like they're getting too old and don't understand what the kids are talking about. But I also do smoke the Zazas, so I'm participatory. Next slide. Okay, so cannabis industry hard facts. Some serious hard facts for you guys to like really think about. while walking into this, and I tell people, if you're making a transition from a super developed industry, like, be ready for a bit of a culture shock. Like, just be ready for it. It'll be a little different, and starting with the question of, like, what do you like weed in your interview, all the way down to, like, the situation where you're having to have, like, an ethical debate. Like, do I say I think you were too high to do that? I think I have to tell somebody that they were too high to do that. Like, were you high at work? Like, that's a real question that I have to ask people, and I'm just like, fuck, I don't want to ask this question. Like, don't be so high that you fuck up. Like, real life. But I'm sorry. There's the line. I smoke a gang of weed, but there's the line, And, like, also be aware of what your job is. Like, are you driving or are you packaging? Because one of them is drastically more important, that you not fucking be so high that you're missing things. Obviously I want you to be good at everything that you do, but, like, there's levels to this shit, player. Okay, so there's no constants in cannabis. Like, every day, every single day, man, I'm learning something new. I'm a new law. Like, they're trying to pass a bill right now that's gonna make it a fucking felony for growing more than 16 plants in your house. Like, that just came out the other day, and I was like, wait, we've made it so far, and now California's trying to fucking felonize home grow. And like, 16 is a really low number. Like, we could have, what was it? It was 6. No, but it was the immature. You have immature. It was 12 immature, and so it was 18. It was 18. It was 12 immature and 6 mature plants. So if you had more than any of that, it's now going to be a felony, punishable by jail time and, like, fucking all these fines. It was so bad. And, like, that just came out the other day, and I'm over here like, weed for the people. And then they're like, not you, that's too many plants. And, like, I understand not being able to do, like, hundreds of plants, because that's obviously a fucking business. But, like, 6 might not be a business. Like, you might even, like, for how much weed I smoke, I'd have to grow, like, 24 plants at a time. For the 3 months, like, how long it takes, that's real life. In my house, you know what I mean? I'm not talking about, like, outside fucking Christmas trees. That's aggressive. I'm not that person. But, like, if I just had, like, my closet plants or, like, my little garage, like, yeah, I'd probably have to grow 24 plants. Like, this is crazy. Fucking 6 and go to prison. It's stupid. We've made it so far, but we haven't. 30 to 60% of the industry still doesn't pay their bills on time. That's some real life stuff. And for the most part, we've gotten to a place of legitimacy in payroll. It's gotten better. There was a long, long time, and there's still companies that'll pay you in cash. They'll write you the form, but are still paying you in cash, because banking is still really hard. And so, like, that process of being able to get money from point A to point B and make sure you pay Uncle Sam and do all of that is still really hard. And so that balance is not really fully there yet. So, being conscientious of the fact that if you're in sales is a perfect example, and part of your life is based off a commission, right? And part of that commission only comes if the client pays their bills. Be conscious of the fact, like, don't be banking on that whole sales. Oh, I just sold $50,000 worth of product to, all these people, and it was 10 different people. All right, well, 7 of them are going to pay their bills. So let's roll the dice as to which 7, and let's count your commission on those checks. And then assume that the next few are going to come eventually. And I hate to sound like such a naysayer, but that's real. That's, like, personal. I've experienced it. I've seen it. And, like, when commission-only jobs are being paid off of monies being closed in, that's real. 50% of the cannabis industry will say no one is paying attention to fill in the blank. Like, whatever it is. Like, you could just say, like, any of it. And I'm just like, well, okay. Well, not today, but someday. Just don't live a life of nobody's paying attention to. Like, what's that saying? Integrity is doing the right thing when nobody is watching. You want to be in the legal weed game. Like, just fucking pick. Like, go trap it out, or, like, make it into the weed business, into the legal cannabis business. Like, pick. And I'm not saying that I want to, like, push people to the illicit market, because that shit's scary as fuck. It's not what it used to be. I used to run around pounds of weed, and I would never do that shit anymore. Like, real life. I would never do that shit anymore. Even with the way that things have changed with the government, I still wouldn't do that anymore. And, like, maybe I'm just gotten too scared, but that's not a life, unfortunately. That's not a long-term career path. And the reality that, you could get a job. perfect example. So our company, we hire in $18 an hour as our standard entry rate. We do standard union wage raises where every 6 months you'll get a 50-cent raise up to, and a standard entry wage position will tap out at $24. So you stay at a company for 6 years, you can get $24 doing an entry job that you've gotten good at. And you can make decent money not having to become like the director of a giant corporation. You can become the manager of that facility and, you know, make 60 grand a year, 70 grand a year. And like that is real. Those are real opportunities. And, you know, the reality that nobody's paying attention with the reality that you could potentially retire in a normal life and have maybe a pension and a 401k, and not everyone's gonna become fucking rich. I didn't put it on my slide, but I just wanna make sure that everyone understands that. I didn't wanna put it on my slide because I feel like an asshole when I put it on my slide. But I don't wanna like tell people like, oh, you're not gonna make money. Cause yeah, you could fucking be Gary Vaynerchuk of weed. That's not impossible. Do you guys know like I started? He used to just do a fucking YouTube video every single day. Nobody watched any of his YouTube videos for the longest time. He was doing wine reviews. You know, Gary V, the guy, yeah, he was doing fucking wine reviews. And he did like 300 of them, and his dad owned a liquor store, a high-end liquor store. He did like 300 of them before anybody even cared about the guy. And now he's like a multi-millionaire, probably going towards the B's, investing in all of these amazing tech things. And not to say that you can't be that for cannabis, but real life, a lot of us are gonna be stoked to be, you know, the general manager. And I've had to recently come to this reality. I've been doing this so long, I had this like thought process my whole life that I was just gonna fucking get to this place, and I was like, I'm gonna fucking get rich. And I was just like, I was like the underpants gnomes, you know, where it's like phase 1, sell cannabis, phase 2, phase 3, profits, you know, and everyone's like, what's phase 2? And I'm like, fuck, I don't know. But most of your bosses are figuring it out as they go. And be very conscious of that too. I get asked a question every day that I just like respond to because that's actually what my job is. And then afterwards I go to the computer, I'm like, holy fuck, I hope that was the right answer. Yes. Like, okay, this is that. And like, I think I knew, but like some of this stuff in cannabis, it's really, really hard to know what it's almost as bad as the way that what's happening with our society right now on like, are we or are we not allowed to like engage this way? I feel like that in cannabis, where every day it's like, I don't know what the right answer is for this, but we will read and we will find it. And, you know, maybe it'll be a felony to have 7 plants in your house. I don't know. Next slide. So this is a little montage of a bunch of fun shit that I've done in my life. And I just remind people that you're going to be spending most of your life at work. So like, don't do something that you hate. Like, please do not do something that you hate. Find something that you like, because the only way that you're going to be able to do something great is if you like it. And got a Steve Jobs quote, your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. Next slide. Okay, so getting ready for an interview. Know yourself. They're going to ask you a bunch of shit. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Very important bits of information. Accomplishments. Be able to tell me something, right? What is something you're proud of that you've done? Interests, goals. Know why you're doing it. Your why is actually pretty relative in these conversations. Like, what is the purpose of this for you? What does this mean? Like, I want to do this. And it's not scary to employers to hear you say, like, you want to do this because someday you want to own your own something. Like, people are like, oh, I don't want to tell them because they think, like, I mean, unless it's like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do this, I'm going to compete with you exactly. You're like, okay, that's a little bit weird, but, like, everyone wants to own their own business. Like, that's the reality. Like, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. Know the job details, so ask some questions. What's the pay? What's the hours? What is the location? Ask some questions. Be willing to ask questions. Understand the expectations and be honest about your experience. Holy moly, be honest about your experience, because when you show up and it's not what you said you could do, it really sucks, because we believed you in the interview. It's our bad, but all right, next slide. Plant touching career options, so we could get into cultivation, manufacturing, testing, distribution, or retail. In cultivation, you could do something like trim, you could do plant work, cloning, harvest tech, inventory and metric, sales, or packaging. These are all just kind of ideas or career kind of paths that you can go down. A lot of different companies will have different titles for them, or manufacturing, you could do cleaning, packaging, lab assisting, machine operating, general lab work, kitchen work, because manufacturing, we could be talking about food, you know, we could be talking about lotions, a bunch of different types of products, inventory or metric, and sales. Testing, you could do transportation, data entry, you could be a scientist. I feel like that's a little bit harder to just become, but you could be a scientist. Data management, and you could be auditing. There is definitely a lot of need for auditing in manufacturing and testing as well. Distribution, you could be a packager, inventory, driver, sales. And in retail, you know, retail has a lot of different angles. The DTC model, or direct to consumer model, is becoming a really big part right now. So there's like, you know, dispatch, there's drivers, you could be a front desk at a retail establishment in person, delivery or sales, retail sales, inventory, you know, get your way to management. Next slide. Non-plant touching careers are a little less fun, but they're still cool. I'm just kidding. And I'm not trying to, my roommate who just left here, he works in tech, so he'd be sad. He would have been like what are you talking about? Yeah, it definitely doesn't. I mean, nah. I mean, unless you're in the money transfer, and I don't know, that feels different. Marketing, you could do graphic design, social media, influencer. Influencer's a real-ass career, y'all. I mean, I don't know for how long, but like, it's a real ass career. Like, if you could be interesting and get people engaged, that's a real life thing. Like, I'm impressed by people that do it, but that is a real life thing. PR and media, events, you could be a journalist. You know, people having really good ability to tell a story is really important right now. We're living in a time in society that, like, the story is very important for the brand, for the ability to connect with something. So, you know, be a good storyteller and write that shit down. Business, you could be a lawyer. Again, probably a little bit harder to become that, but if you are, we need them. Technical writer, again, the ability to tell a story, but that's like technically telling a story. Accounting, bookkeeping, tax attorney, human resources. Woo, big important one. If you do HR stuff, cannabis industry needs you. Secure, you keep things secure. Security, camera management, alarms, cash transport. Cash transport is a very important thing right now. If that's something that, you know, your business model has the ability to do, that is actually an important piece. Because nobody will bank us. It's really hard. It just sucks. Supplies, we always need supplies, and I've actually helped build businesses completely off of supplying the supplies necessary for cannabis businesses, because you end up with like 150 vendors just to get all the products that you need. So streamlining that vendor process is exceptionally valuable. You have to be impeccable with logistics to do something like that, but it is a thing that it has a big place. Cultivation, lab, kitchen, office, all of it's important. And then the last part, services. We have a lot of different services: waste management, chemical removal, and chemical sales, really. General cleaning, pesticide training, OSHA training, technology. Like, there's a software for everything. We need good softwares, though. So, next slide. Resume tips. Resume, what stands between you and your dream job? Let's make sure resume game's strong. Next slide. Bing, bing. All right, some resume faux pas. What not to do on your resume. Don't give me too much information. It gets overwhelming. Don't give me a wall of text. I won't read it. If you have spelling mistakes, I throw it away. Inaccuracies about your qualifications or experience. If there's been times where I'm like, that's not possible. That's not a real thing. That's trash. Unnecessary personal information. Ooh, TMI. On a resume? Like, we could talk about it maybe, but on a resume? No negative comments about your former employer. So, like, if your like, cover letter is like, I'm leaving my job because my boss sucks. Like, whew, I'm probably not going to hire you. Details about your hobbies and interests, I will likely ask you in an interview, but it does not need to be on your resume unless it's super relevant. If one of your hobbies or interests is that you like to build software and on your like side time, but you're applying for a job to like work in a lab, that's interesting. That's career things. Like that could be useful. If you're like, I also like to drive long distances and I'm applying for something. You're like, okay, we got some long-term, we got drivers that are on the road for like 12 hours a day. And I know that seems like a random thing. You're like, I do like love road trips. People that literally tell me they love road trips, I'm like, all right, you might like to drive far because road trips are not my thing. And if you put me in a car for too many hours, I will hate it. So I would not be the ideal distance driver. Passive language, not very helpful. Tiny text, I don't want to have to squint. And also it makes me feel old when the text is so small and I can't read it. I'm like, do I need my glasses? So don't make me do that. And miscellaneous extra content. A lot of times people like to put pictures of things that they've done on there. Please don't do that. Also, most HR managers do not need to know your birthday or learn your home address. Next slide. All right, so 3 types of resumes. We can have a reverse chronological, we can have a functional, and we can have a combination. So a reverse chronological is like the standard resume. We just kind of have like what we've done. A functional or a fresh one that's specific, it's usually about like a specific type of job you're looking for, right? So if you were a grower or you're trying to get a graphic design job, that's what this one is, it would be all of it's focused on that, right? If you're like, I'm not 100% sure, here's the things that I've done, do it this way, right? And if you're like, I can kind of have both, you're going to do a combo. The combo resume goes with the chronological, but then it's also got some fun stuff where you're like, I'm this good at growing weed, which is relevant, you know, rate yourself on some stuff. Be like, I'm good at this. And those sorts of things are relative. So it's like, this one in the middle is like, I know exactly what the heck I want to do. This one on the left side is like, hire me. This one over here is like, hire me. I kind of know what I want to do, but like, I will take something else, right? Okay, cool. Next slide. Knowledge is power. Understanding the plant is not necessary when you first get hired into like an entry-level position, but in excelling in the industry and the career, it is. So I'm gonna go over a few things. This is gonna be like kind of a fast course version, and then I think I only have like 2 slides after that. But so let's get started with the next slide. All right, so breakdown of 3 different really important categories that you need to really understand once you get going and moving in the cannabis industry. Understanding cannabis flower, it's got a lot of different levels. There's levels to everything and all of them. So where did it come from, right? How did it start? Was it a seed? Was it a clone? Was it a tissue culture? Those are very different. I actually had somebody one day try to sell me clones. He's called really little baby clones. And I was like, that's called a tissue culture. And while it is technically a small clone, if we wanted to have real science terms, trying to sell somebody little baby clones instead of a tissue culture is not exactly ideal. So knowing where the plant came from. Roots, newts, and testing. Having an understanding of what the roots were in, how did it grow? Was it in rock wool? Was it in dirt? Was it in cocoa? Nutrients, how was it fed? Was it an organic feed? Was it, all natural aquaponics? There's a bunch of different ways that you can grow cannabis. Not very well with the aquaponics yet. I haven't seen it that high end, but it is an option. But knowing how the plant was grown. Testing, having an understanding, that it was tested. If it's in the regulated market, it's obviously been tested or should have been tested. It says that it was tested, Method of light, so was it sun, was it greenhouse, was it indoor? These are valuable pieces of information when we want to understand the cost of something, right? The ability to grow something indoors versus with a greenhouse, the cost and the price point is drastically different. So when somebody's like, why is this so expensive? For you to say, well, this is an indoor product, because some people will have indoor and outdoor products. Like, oh, well, I bought that brand for $20 last time. And you're like, well, and they're like, why is this one $60? And you're like, well, that was some like last year's outdoor that you bought for $20. And this is 6 weeks ago's indoor. And here's the difference. This was grown organically. I think this was fish poo. Like, I'm not sure. But those bits of information are valuable when selling it, when smoking it, and when, excelling in the careers. Trim, cure, and age. How is it trimmed? That's actually a price point additional as well. If it was trimmed with a machine, hey, machines are way cheaper than humans, right? So, and it also they're not as good. They're not as good. I mean, robots, they be coming for us, but they're not there yet with weed, so this is like the one thing that we have. We have this left. The robots haven't taken our hand-trimmed weed. But the Green Bros has come really close. It's a machine, and it's very close. It's scary. But how it was trimmed is important. So machine trim versus a hand trim will make a big difference as far as price point, as well as the aesthetics of the plant. Cure, how was it cured? How long was it cured? That does make a difference as well. Like if this plant was, or this product was cured for, 5 days versus 3 weeks, that's the amount of time. It might be a different price point for that reason too. And age, like I said when I was talking about the $20 weed, where you're like, this is last year's outdoor. Like, this is literally 2 years old, this weed. That, will make a difference as well. Might have been $25 last year, but now it's $15. Why? Well, because it's still last year's outdoor. And then the cannabis profile, understanding terpenes and cannabinoids, very important, but for the love of all things good, please don't walk into a store and just be like, what's the highest THC? If anything that I can ask when you leave here, like, or anyone watching in the internet, like, please just stop being just a THC consumer when it comes to flower. There's so much more in cannabis than that. Important. Not saying it's not important, but it's not the only thing. It's not the only variable. It's like picking the person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with because we like the same food. It's like, okay, and that's it? You're like, that's not going to go so well. All right, concentrates, this is important as well. So bit of information about understanding what you're looking at when you're looking at your dabs, right? So what was the starting plant material? The different types of starting plant material, you could have a live product, you could have a dry product, and you could also have full plant, or you could have just trim. So based on the starting product, the price point will be drastically different, right? Like if you had whole buds that made this hash versus some crappy trim, huge difference in price point, right? Like $2,000 a pound for this high-end weed that I made hash out of, and like $12 a pound for this trim from last year's outdoor. Like last year's outdoor just keeps resurfacing because it is still here, guys. It's still here. The method of extraction, so understanding how it got from flower or trim or whatever it was to being hash, right? How did it get there? So we have butane extraction, we have CO2 extraction, we could do rosin extraction. So CO2 being carbon dioxide, it's basically cold and pressurized. There's rosin, and rosin's basically like a heat press. They press it like a t-shirt press, basically. They were originally using hair straighteners till everyone's girlfriends got mad at them. But now they have these big-ass machines. There's a company called Rosin Tech that makes these huge plates that do large amounts of press. You could have ice water hash, so like old school, bubble hash. You can make hash out of sifting it, right? You could do like a screen sift and turn something. They call those the star systems. That's basically just some elite program so that if you're like juiced in with the people that are into the high-end sift hash, you can pretend that you understand and rate it, and you never give it a 5 because you can't, because you're not elite if you give everything or anything the highest score. So everything's like a 4, or no, it could go up to 6. So you can do a 5 because it's 6-star hash is like, it's like you don't even see, it's not a thing. It's like, I tell people, I was saying it's like the Aurora Borealis, but that actually happens. So I don't know. So the different ways that it was extracted, that's important to understand because some are drastically cheaper than others, as well as some are drastically tastier than others. So when you're looking at something and someone's like, oh, I got some hash, and they're like, well, what is it? And they're like, it's distillate. Like, that's not hash, sir. That's THC juice. And we can use it in some food or something, but like I'm not gonna put that on a nail and dab it. But like some people will dab the shit out of it, and I've seen people dab distillate, and you can. They're not saying that you can't. It's just not my terps. Those are not my terps. Final texture and color. Is it crumbly? Is it shattery? Is it battery? When people talk about concentrates and they're like, oh, it's batter or it's butter, a lot of people think that's how it was made, right? No, they're just talking about the texture. Like people were, remember they were calling it earwax? Like, but they were talking about the texture of what it was. And so understanding that word doesn't mean how it was made. It doesn't mean the concentrate method, nothing. It just means what it looks like. That's batter, that's butter, that's diamonds. Because people are making diamonds right now, and everyone was like, oh, it's BHO, it's always BHO. No, people are making all kinds of diamonds right now. Like diamonds, it's an extraction method, and I tell people, do you remember making sugar candy and the strings when you were a kid? Like, that's essentially like the most simple version of what they're doing when they make diamonds, and there's a bunch of different ways to get that crystallization of those cannabinoids. And so just because you have diamonds doesn't mean you know how it was extracted. Most of the time it was butane, but it doesn't mean for sure it was. Something like a batter or a butter, you'd have no idea. Was it butane? Now we're looking at some of the rosins, looking at the batters and the butters looking just like some of the whipped butane products. Butane products are being extracted second time using what's called CRC, or color remediation columns, which is a second wash of this product, which strips all of the color out so it looks all fucking poppin' and beautiful. And it might not be, it might have been last year's outdoor. But it looks poppin' because they CRC'd that shit. And so people are really mad about CRC. One, the silica, they use these beads to clean it. They will run it again through the machine. And the silica can leave a residue, just like butane can leave a residue, just like any of these extraction methods, really outside of the heat press can. You know, you can have something left behind on any of it. So do understand that just because you know what the product looks like does not mean that you know how it started. And so asking those questions is important. The product stability, how stable is the product? Does it need to be in a refrigerator? Like, that's actually valid to know. A lot of the rosins now, I can't even handle some of the companies. They're like, it needs to be frozen at this temperature. I'm like, no, bro, like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna take this, I'm just gonna put it in my car, and then I'm gonna like go somewhere, and I'm gonna pull it out of my car, and then I'm gonna dab it, and then I'm gonna like leave it on my table at home. That's what's gonna happen. And they're like, no, you gotta get this little fucking freezer. And I'm like, no. But my roommate's got the little freezer, and he does it, and he's like religious about it, but like, I'm not that person. But again, important information to know if you're trying to sell it or have the product available. Terpenes and cannabinoids, obviously very important as well, right? Both important, not the only thing. And I put it at the end because I think important thing about this is not the most important part. Understanding edibles, this one's actually a bit crazier, and I hope, can we actually give them the ability to download this on the website or something? Because then you guys can have access to this. I'd love you guys to be able to have all of this, because these are really informational. I made these little like cards that are really informational. Edible concentrates, understanding, or edible products, understanding what it is that you're eating will be very important to understand why some stuff gets you way higher than other stuff when you eat the same milligrams, right? And it's because of the base level of the product. So we'll start with your base concentrate, right? Certain concentrates, like a CO2 oil, won't metabolize the same way as like a butter-based edible or something that is bound to fats, right? So a coconut oil or a butter will metabolize much quicker in your body than a distillate product will. And so when people eat butter-based edibles, you feel like you get a little bit higher, a little bit quicker, like the old school brownies and stuff, or even, you know, coconut oils are a good example as well. But it's important to understand what the base level product was. And then also, some people didn't realize that you have to actually activate the product because THC-A, which is the acidic version of THC, THC-A is non-psychotropic, so it doesn't give you the head change. So if it's a like ice water extracted hash and they made something that was cold out of it, you wouldn't actually get high. You would get like minimally, your body will break it down, and like your body's hot enough and the acids are strong enough to like get some conversion in your body, but you have to heat that THC-A up to above 352 degrees for a little bit of time for that acidic carbon to go away, and now we've got the shit that gets you fucked up, which is THC, Delta 9, and or Delta 8 if you're one of the people that are converting it, but I'm not going there today. Is there a fat content? We talked about that a little bit. Very important, very valuable to know. Your body will metabolize it better if there is fat content in the product, and or now we're having the conversation of nano-emulsified products. We actually have a nano-emulsified product that we sell called Splash Nano, and so that does kind of change the variable of the need for a fat base because of the nano-emulsification, allowing for your body to absorb it quicker. Indica versus sativa, why that's not relevant. First of all, it means nothing. I'll just tell you that. Indica versus sativa is a nomenclature in regards to where the plant came from, not how it makes you feel. In science, correlation is not causation, so just because a plant came from the Indica Mountains, and most of the time has sedative effects because terpenes like linalool often exist in desert areas, but not all of them. So when somebody says this is an indica, that does not mean it will make you go down. But what we've done is we've turned this commonplace nomenclature into an answer, indica or sativa. First of all, that's not real. I'm not gonna argue that about the flower part because people are very juiced on it. Like, they're so deep in it. This part, I'll fight this till the day that I die, because when you're breaking something down and you're heating it up into concentrate and the terpenes are gone, you're not putting terps in. And you might be extracting terps and then adding them back after. At that point, you can say that it has a sedative effect or it's an uplifting effect, and I'll play games with that. I'll appreciate that, and I'll understand and I'll respect it. But to tell me that you have an indica edible or a sativa edible is just wrong. It's just wrong. It's bad science, and you're perpetuating misinformation in the industry, edible companies, and we're all a part of the game, and we're continuing it by asking for our indica edible. It's not real, it's not a thing, and I actually won't distribute a product that says it on the box. Like, I refuse. So if you'll notice, none of my edibles say indica or sativa on them. Won't do it. How old is it? THC does degrade, so there is value to know how old something is. The state of California will only allow you to have something for 1 year after COA date, because then the COA, or the certificate of analysis, see, look at me there speaking in codes. The certificate of analysis actually requires that it be within a year for it to be sold at a retail establishment. Cannabinoid potency, this is the place where it matters a lot in edibles. That, like, is a real ass thing. Like, 10 milligrams versus 50 milligrams on an edible night is a big difference. So this is really important when it comes to edibles. Not as important, like I said, when it comes to other things, but definitely probably your number one thought process when you're trying to make sure that you don't go overboard is, where is your titration, or where is your level where you feel like, okay, I'm high now. I am a 10 milligram edible person, and I can smoke an eighth of weed a day. So it's very good to understand that even a small amount of edibles can really affect certain people. And the reason for that is on the bottom corner there, we have what's called a P450 enzyme. And that enzyme actually, there's 7% of American society does not have this enzyme. It's in your liver, and it metabolizes THC and turns it into beta-11 hydroxy. People that don't have that enzyme can't get high off of edibles. Has anybody ever had a friend that's like, I don't ever get high? And you'll watch them and you're like, bro, we just gave you 1,000 milligrams. What the fuck? That friend doesn't have the enzyme. I'm not a doctor, but I play one in my personal life. That friend doesn't have an enzyme, that enzyme. And that enzyme is necessary to break the delta-9 down and metabolize it into beta-11 hydroxy. So it's actually super interesting to see those people, because I'm like, really? Can we watch? Like, I definitely like watching. And then what other ingredients are in it? Very important, very valuable, and I think that is my last slide. 2 more? Oh, wait, what's the next one say? I think it's just like, oh, yeah, this is us. Following my dreams to the ends of the earth with the people and the products that I believe in. I highly recommend that whatever it is that you guys try to do or want to do or participate in this space, that it be something that you believe in. Don't fucking waste your time doing things that you don't believe in. Actually, it's so funny. Look at these girls are in this picture. We are distributors, LB Atlantis, Cold Fire, Weed for Warriors, Fruit Slabs, Hey Bud, and Splash. I'm really proud of my company. I'm really proud of what we're doing. And like I said to everybody, please make sure you leave a resume for me in the basket. I'm super thankful that you guys had time to learn. I hope you guys learned a little bit today. Like I said, I want to give you guys the slides available. And then next slide. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys. And my contact's here.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much, Nicole West, for that really informative, I would hope, and a focused discussion on this industry from the perspective of what it takes to be a professional. We're going to take a quick break right now. If anyone needs to use the restroom, so forth, wants to talk, say hello to anybody. If anyone who just got in the room wants to say hello to Nicole while she has a few moments. We're going to do a panel. We're bringing up another special speaker today, Elliot Lewis, who's the CEO and founder of the fastest growing cannabis dispensary brand here in California, which is Catalyst, right? And so he's definitely someone who is going to give you some perspective on what it takes to be an employee at one of his many dispensaries throughout here, the state and Southern California region. So take a few minutes, take a quick break, and we're going to reset the stage, and we're going to get into that panel here shortly.